What happens when someone tries to silence the worship of a man chosen by Allah? Not with arguments, not with reason, but with humiliation, violence, and hate. This isn't just a story about patience. It's a story about divine justice. Terrifying, so miraculous that even the people who heard about it afterward couldn't believe it was real. A poor woodcutter, a devoted man who never raised his voice, never cursed anyone, and never stopped worshipping, no matter what was thrown at him, and a woman, so cruel, so twisted in her soul, that she mocked his prayers, snatched away the Quran from his hands, and laughed. But that laugh didn't last long, because the punishment she faced right in this world wasn't just a warning. It was a lesson written by the heavens. This is the story of a man whose silence spoke louder than screams, and of a woman whose evil brought down a punishment no one could ever forget. In a quiet village hidden between the trees and silence, lived a man the world never noticed, but Allah did. He wasn't rich, he didn't hold titles, but from childhood, he was different. While other boys chased games, he chased the call of prayer. While others dreamed of wealth, he dreamed of closeness to his Creator. This man worked as a woodcutter, his hands rough, his clothes simple, his heart pure. Every swing of his axe, every drop of sweat on his forehead was followed by the name of Allah on his lips. He lived in a tiny home with his wife, a woman just as righteous, just as devoted. They didn't have gold, but they had peace. They didn't have luxuries, but they had faith, and to them, that was enough. Then one day Allah blessed them with something they'd long prayed for, a son. A beautiful child with bright eyes and a heart already full of nur. They held him like he was the greatest treasure on earth. But just as quickly as happiness came, a shadow followed. Soon after the child's birth, the mother began to fall ill. And no matter how many herbs, prayers, or treatments they tried, her condition worsened until she quietly returned to her Creator, leaving behind her husband and their newborn son. The woodcutter, heartbroken but unshaken, wiped his tears not with bitterness, but with trust. Because he knew when Allah takes, He always gives back in ways we don't see yet. From that day forward, the woodcutter became both father and mother. He didn't complain. He didn't ask, "Why me?" He simply loved, deeply, quietly, constantly. Every morning, before the village awoke, he would gather his axe, his prayer mat, and his little boy. While others saw forests as work, he saw them as a masjid. And beneath the shade of tall trees, with birds echoing the praises of Allah, he would lay his son down gently, whisper a dua into his ear, and begin his prayers. When the boy grew hungry, the father would pause to milk a goat with his own tired hands, feeding him fresh, warm milk before returning to his worship. There were no toys, no swings, no soft pillows, just the earth, the sky, and a father's endless love wrapped around a childlike shelter from the world. Years passed like this. The child grew, not just in size, but in heart. He learned gentleness from his father's silence, strength from his father's sujud. By the time he became a young man, his eyes shone with the same light his father carried, the light of someone raised in remembrance. And so, one day, with tears of pride in his eyes, the father said, "It's time my son should marry. He deserves a partner, someone to build a home with, someone who will honor this house and perhaps free me to focus even more on worship." But what he didn't know was that the very woman meant to bring peace into his home would soon bring a storm he never could have imagined. At first, everything seemed perfect. the son married a young woman from the village, soft-spoken, polite, respectful. She smiled at her father-in-law, cooked meals, cleaned the home, spoke gently. And the old man, he raised his hands in gratitude, whispering, Alhamdulillah, thinking, Ya Allah, you've blessed me again. She will care for my son and honor this house. But time reveals what manners try to hide. Slowly, quietly, things began to change. The meals stopped arriving on time. Then they stopped altogether. The house began to collect dust, and the smiles, they turned into scowls. Still, the old man said nothing. He'd return home from the forest tired, aching only to find no food, no water, no help. So he cooked, cleaned, fed the goats, washed the floors, and when he was done, he still prayed. But the more he stayed silent, the bolder she became. She began yelling, insulting, ordering him around like a servant. Wash the dishes, clean this mess. Why are you just sitting there with your prayer mat all day? One day, as he stood for Salah, she snatched the prayer mat from beneath him and hit him with a broom, again and again. Still, he didn't tell his son, not because he was weak, but because he loved too much. If I speak, he thought, I'll destroy my son's marriage. Let me bear this burden alone. But the abuse didn't stop. She threw away his medicine, mocked his Quran recitation, even warned him, if you tell anyone, I'll make you regret it. What she didn't realize was that the silent man she was beating was protected by the one who never stays silent for long. Night after night, the old man sat alone, his back against the wall, his prayer mat folded beside him, his heart heavy but his lips still whispering Subhanallah. He no longer had strength to chop wood, no strength to argue, but he still had one thing, his patience, and she had none. Each day her insults grew louder, each task more cruel. One evening, she even snatched the Quran from his hands, mid-recitation, screaming, Stop pretending to be holy. No one cares about your worship. His hands trembled, but he didn't raise them to defend himself. Instead, he raised them to the sky. That night, as the stars blinked quietly above, the old man sat beneath them and finally broke his silence. Not to his son, not to his abuser, but to the only one who had always listened. Ya Allah, ... give me peace, show me a way. I don't ask for revenge, ask for relief. Before dawn, he stood silently, gathered his Quran and prayer mat, kissed the walls of his tiny room one last time, and left. No shoes, no food, just faith. He walked into the forest, the same forest where he once carried his son, fed him milk, and whispered du'as under the trees. Now he walked alone, but not abandoned. As the sun rose and birds began their morning taz, he sat beneath an old tree, closed his eyes, and began to worship. But what happened next was nothing short of miraculous. As the sun climbed higher, its golden light slipped through the branches, painting the earth with warmth. The old man sat in perfect stillness, his hands raised, his voice low, whispering praises to the one who had never left his side. Then suddenly, footsteps, hurried, heavy, frantic. A man rushed through the trees, holding a crying child in his arms. The boy's face was twisted in pain, his skin pale, breath shallow. Please, the man cried, his voice trembling. Is there anyone here who can help? My son, he's dying. The old man looked up, not with fear, not with panic, but with a calmness only years of faith can bring. He stood, placed his hand gently over the child's chest, closed his eyes, and began to recite. Soft, steady, certain, and within moments, the child's cries faded. His breathing calmed, color returned to his face, as if life had been poured back into him by unseen hands. The father was stunned. "Who are you?" he whispered. The old man smiled. "Just a servant of Allah, here to worship in peace." But peace wouldn't last for long, because that man, grateful beyond words, refused to let the old man go. "Please come with me," he begged. "Stay in my home. Let me serve you. We've been searching for someone like you our entire lives." And so, reluctantly, the old man agreed. At the man's home, his sister, kind-hearted and curious, welcomed the stranger with humility. She watched the old man rise in the night to pray, listened to his gentle words, and slowly, something awakened in her. She began to ask questions, to learn, to change. The house that once echoed with routine now pulsed with dhikr. Blessings poured in like rain. Their livestock multiplied, their crops thrived, and people from neighboring villages began hearing whispers of a man whose hands held healing, and whose words carried light. But while one house flourished in the forest, another home, the one the old man had left behind, began to crumble. Back in the old house, silence had become unbearable. The goats began dying, one after another. Reason, no illness, just lifeless. The crops dried up, as if the land itself had turned its back, and the home that once smelled of prayer and peace now reeked of tension, decay, and something far worse. The wife, now unchallenged, showed her true face without restraint. She cooked only for herself, mocked her husband's sadness, and when he asked about his father, she sneered. He was old, useless. Maybe Allah took him, but the son couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had grown up seeing faith, love, mercy. What he now saw in his own home was nothing but darkness. One day, while traveling to another village to sell the last of their goats, he stopped near a quiet forest, rode exhausted and discouraged. There, just off the path, stood a small hut, simple but glowing with light. He watched as people came and went, leaving with tears of relief and eyes full of awe. Curious, he asked a shopkeeper nearby, "Who lives there?" The man replied, almost in a whisper, "That is the home of a blessed man, a man whose du'as are never wasted. People say Allah has placed healing in his hands." The son's heart skipped. Could it be? He waited, sat beneath a tree until the time for Asr prayer came, and then the door opened. An old man stepped out, his beard silver, his back slightly bent, his eyes glowing with the same light the son remembered from childhood. It was him, his father. The son stood frozen, then ran forward, collapsing at his father's feet, sobbing without words. The old man bent down, lifted him up, and embraced him, silent tears running down both their faces. The son begged, "Please, please, come back. Forgive me. I had no idea what she had become. I thought you left us. I didn't know you were being driven out." The old man hesitated, not out of anger, but out of love. "I feared for your home," he whispered, "so I said nothing. But I never left you in my heart, not for a moment." And with that, the two men, father and son, returned together. But what awaited them inside that house was not just silence. It was a test unlike any they had faced before. When they stepped into the house, the air grew cold. The daughter-in-law stood at the doorways, smiling, acting surprised, as if she hadn't turned that home into a prison. She faked joy, pretended concern. "Oh, you're back. We were so worried." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes betrayed her. The old man said nothing. He simply walked to his room, picked up his worn prayer mat from the corner where she had once thrown it, and laid it down again. He returned to his silence, to his worship, to his quiet suffering. But this time, he wasn't alone. She tried to play the same game, serving food when her husband was home, smiling politely during the day, but when the son left for work, the mask came off again. And once again, she began shouting, insulting, mocking the old man's prayers, until the walls felt like they were echoing with her poison. But Allah does not let truth hide forever. One afternoon, as the sun blazed outside, the girl from the village, the one who had learned the Quran from the old man, came to visit. She found him outside, washing dishes in the burning heat, sweat dripping down his back, his hands trembling from weakness. She ran to him. "Why are you doing this? Where is she? Where is your son?" The old man smiled faintly. "She's not feeling well today. I thought I'd help," but she knew. She saw the bruises. She saw the pain behind his eyes. When the son returned home that evening, the girl couldn't stay silent. She told him everything. At first, he was in disbelief. She changed. She's been good since Baba returned. But doubt began to creep in. So he watched, quietly, closely, and what he saw shattered him. One night, he hid outside his father's door, and through the crack, he watched his wife shove the old man to the ground, screaming, "Why don't you just leave again? Take your Quran and get out." And then, she grabbed the Quran from his hands. That's when it happened. The sky didn't thunder, the earth didn't shake, but something far more terrifying occurred. Her hands twisted suddenly, violently, like they no longer belonged. To her, her legs buckled, bending backwards. Her tongue stiffened, hanging grotesquely from her mouth. Her body contorted, turning into something half human, half beast. She collapsed, groaning, growling, deformed, humiliated, unrecognizable. Allah's punishment had arrived. Right there, right then, with no warning and no mercy. The room froze. The son stood at the doorway, breath caught in his throat, watching the scene before him, folding like a nightmare. His wife, now barely human, writhed on the floor, her eyes rolled back, her limbs twisted like broken branches, her tongue hung out grotesquely, unable to speak, only howl and still. In her rage, she tried to reach for the Quran. Her clawed fingers stretched toward it, shaking, desperate. But they couldn't touch it. The Book of Allah glowed under the sunlight pouring through the window. Untouchable, protected. The old man stood still, not shocked, not angry, but heartbreakingly calm. He picked up the Quran, pressed it to his chest, and turned away. The son dropped to his knees. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. The woman he had trusted, the one he had brought into his home, had raised her hands against the very man who raised him. Tears flooded his eyes. "Ya Allah," he whispered, "what have I done?" The girl from the village rushed in, covering her face in horror. Neighbors gathered outside, hearing the unnatural cries. The son didn't wait. He dragged his wife out of the house as she shrieked, no longer able to form words, no longer recognizable. The villagers watched in silence as he took her into the jungle far from the home she poisoned. And that's where it ended. The next day, they found what was left of her, nothing but torn cloth and footprints of wild animals. Some said she was devoured. Others whispered Allah had erased her from this world himself. But one thing was certain: her story spread like wildfire. A warning written not in ink, but in punishment. Never mock the worship of the pious. Never raise a hand against the beloved of Allah. Peace returned, but it didn't come with celebration. It came with quiet tears, late-night repentance, and long prostrations. The son couldn't sleep for nights. He would sit by his father's side, holding his hands, whispering, "Forgive me, Baba, please, forgive me." But the old man, he had already forgiven him long before the apology. "I never wanted to break your home," he said softly. "I endured it all. Not because I was weak, but because I loved you. She didn't hate me, my son. She hated my worship." And in that sentence, the weight of the past finally lifted. The son made a vow. Never again would he let cruelty live in his house. Never again would he turn a blind eye to injustice, especially against the righteous. Time passed, and with it came a new beginning. The pious girl, the one who had stood up for the old man, who had learned the Quran from him, who had wept when he suffered, was asked for her hand in marriage. And she agreed, not for wealth, not for comfort, but because she knew the kind of home she'd be helping to build. Together, they transformed the old house into something far more powerful than a place to live. They opened a madrasa, small school where children from across the village came to learn the Quran, to study the values of kindness, faith, and truth. The old man taught them stories of the prophets. The daughter-in-law cooked meals with love. The son provided for the madrasa with his hands and heart. And once again, that home once filled with screams and darkness, now echoed with laughter, with prayer, with peace. Allah's blessings poured down like never before. Sustenance grew. Barakah surrounded them, and people would often say, "That house feels like Jannah." Some stories end with revenge. Others end with regret. But this one ends with a deep into the hearts of those who heard it. Never raise your voice against a person who lowers their head only for Allah. The woman who mocked worship, who insulted the Quran, who believed her cruelty would remain hidden. She didn't just break a home, she tried to break a bond between a servant and his creator. And in return, her punishment came not in the hereafter, but in this life. Sudden, public, terrifying, but the one she hurt. He didn't curse her, he didn't fight her, he didn't even speak against her. He simply turned to Allah, and Allah did the rest. This story isn't just about pain, it's about patience. It's about faith so strong that it survives abuse. Injustice, loneliness, and still stands tall in sujud. It's about a man who chose silence over bitterness, forgiveness over anger, and was rewarded with honor, healing, and a home filled with light. So if you're suffering quietly, if you're being wronged and no one sees it, don't rush to revenge. Raise your hands, not in fury, but in dua. Because when the world turns against you, Allah never will. Years passed, but the story never faded. Children who once sat at the feet of the old man grew up to become imams, teachers, and protectors of the Quran. That small madrasa blossomed into a sanctuary, not just of learning, but of healing. People traveled miles to visit the humble home, where miracles once happened, not because it was grand, not because it was famous, but because something lived there that no wealth could ever but barakah. The son, now older and wiser, would often sit beside his father after Fajr prayer. They'd sip tea in silence, watching the sun rise over a home that had once known so much darkness. now filled with nothing but light. And sometimes the father would speak not of the pain, not of the betrayal, but of how Allah turned his trials into treasures. Everything she tried to destroy, he once said, became the very thing Allah used to raise us higher. And that girl, the one who once defended him, who honored his faith, she became a mother not just to her own children, but to the entire village, teaching young girls to love the Quran, to respect the elders, to never fear standing up for what's right. This story was told again and again, in tea gatherings, in classrooms, around fires on winter nights, and every time it ended with the same lesson: if you harm the righteous, you declare war against the one who protects them. But if you serve them, love them, and walk beside them in goodness, Allah will write your name among the blessed.